Today on the Audi we're going to be installing the integrated engineering cold air intake as well as our turbo inlet pipe. So let's get started. So first things first, we'll have to start by removing the stock air box, and the first step for that will be removing the engine cover, which to achieve this you should just pull up sharply on the engine cover and it should pop off of its grommets. There should be 4 of them. Next, we'll be removing this hose clamp from the airbox side hose. You can use pliers, or if you have special hose clamp pliers, those are best, but today we're just using standard channel locks. And for this next section, we will be removing a hose clamp at the back of the intake pipe. And depending on where yours is located, where the nut is located rather, this may be a more difficult step than it has to be. The hose clamp is right where my finger is, but unfortunately from the factory, the nut for the hose clamp on my particular vehicle is on the bottom, down here. It's a 7mm nut, or you can use a Phillips head screwdriver if you can access it, but with mine, I will be using a small ratchet wrench with a 7mm socket to loosen it, and that should be loose. And now with both hose clamps loose, we should be able to remove the intake pipe. Just like that. Next is to remove the secondary air hose from the airbox, as you can see here. And for these, you pinch them on both sides and you'll be pulling away from the airbox. It should come off just like that. Next, we will be removing this vacuum hose just right next to the secondary air hose. Be careful not to damage it because it will be reused later. I'm going to use a small screwdriver just to kind of coax it out a little bit. And there we go. Now we will be removing 2 T25 Torx screws from the airbox inlet. One is located here on the passenger side. And the other is located in a similar location here on the driver's side. Next, we will work on removing the airbox inlet. And to do that, we will push down on the airbox, like so. And repeat this step on both sides. Once both sides are released, we can work on removing the inlet from the vehicle. And ensure that the ducting comes apart from the airbox as well. Now we will work to remove the airbox, which should now only be held on by some grommets, one of them here and one of them at the back just in front of the battery. And you should be able to pull up straight. It may take a few tries and some elbow grease, but eventually the airbox should be released from its grommets and you should be able to pull it out. And it's actually held in by a third one underneath the airbox, which goes in right there. Next, we will be working to remove this coolant line, which has 2 hose clamps, one here and one at the bottom. We'll be working on the top portion first, and some coolant may run out, which is why I have this lovely yellow towel. And Integrated Engineering actually supplies you with caps which you can slide over the pipe once you remove the hose, just to cap off any coolant that may run out in the process of switching out the coolant hoses. Again, we have our handy channel locks here, and we have our cap. We'll see how much coolant will come out at this point. Remove the hose clamp. We're not going to be reusing this hose, so feel free to do what you wish with it. And after lots of twisting, I have removed the coolant hose. Not too much coolant came out. And here we are, the other end. Once again, I'll make sure my towel is in place to catch any unwanted coolant flow. Remove the hose clamp. Should be able to remove this hose. And place the cap on with minimal spillage. And just like that, the factory coolant line is out. And place this end of the hose on. Just like so. So we will remove the cap and place on the hose. And this comes with supplied hose clamps, which are 7 millimeters. So we'll go ahead and tighten that up now. Now we'll go ahead and remove this cap and place this end of the hose on. Just like so. And now we can work on getting both of these hose clamps tight, and this coolant hose is installed. And now that we have the coolant hose installed, we can work on installing the heat shield. I've loosely connected them both with the hardware, and once we get it installed completely, then I'll snug these down. So they want you to install this in a similar location to where the factory one was located. And the hole should line up right here, because this is where you will replace one of those T25 Torx screws that you removed earlier. And on the driver's side, there will be 2 grommets in the heat shield, which go on the posts that were used for the original airbox. And this may take some force. Should sit snug there. And there. And now on the driver's side, we will be installing the heat shield with one of the 4 millimeter Allen bolts supplied by Integrated Engineering. Just snug. And now I will tighten up the rest of the heat shield bolts. Just has to be snug. And there we go. And now before we start working on getting the intake piping in, I figured it would be a good time to go ahead and try and remove the factory turbo inlet pipe so we can install the Integrated Engineering turbo inlet pipe. And you guys probably can't see it, but behind this hose, which will have to come off, there is a T30 Torx, just one screw, one bolt. And I'm going to go ahead and, I believe people say you can just loosen it, you don't have to actually completely remove it. So I'm going to just loosen it and see if I can start to rotate this turbo inlet pipe. And you should be able to rotate it. You'll turn it clockwise, which will be towards the firewall, and then we'll work on removing this secondary air hose. And I'm not sure how to remove this it's not a secondary air hose, I'm not sure what it is, an air hose. So I figured it might be easier to remove the turbo inlet and then remove And there it is. Now we will work on removing this secondary air hose. Finally got the secondary air hose off. And so this is the stock turbo inlet pipe. So here's the difference between the factory and integrated engineering turbo inlet pipe. You can see the diameter difference all the way through the pipe itself. Okay, so here we have the integrated engineering turbo inlet pipe with the included seal. The bracket is on, and let's install it. So we'll install it similarly to the way you removed the other one. Start with it facing north, turn it counterclockwise until the bolt holes line up. Okay, looking at the turbo inlet pipe here, this is the inlet, this is that secondary air hose or whatever this goes onto, and at the back the bracket goes behind the hole for this bolt. And I'd say a little piece of advice is to adjust the bracket mounting on the turbo inlet until the hole on the turbo lines up as best as possible to the bracket, so that way you don't end up stripping this bolt, which you cannot actually buy separately. So it's a pretty important bolt. So we'll go ahead and replace this bolt. So we finally have the bolt in and ready to be tightened. And when I took it off, it wasn't very tight at all, actually. So I'd say just hand tighten it. Definitely don't hulk it down or anything crazy, but just snug enough to stay on. And then we'll be replacing the air hose. And these usually require a bit of force, so and then pull on it to see if it'll come off. And it doesn't, so I'd say that is installed. And now with the turbo inlet pipe installed, we can work on installing the first of the intake hoses. And so we'll put on the turbo side first. I'm going to leave everything loose. I'm not going to tighten any of these hose clamps until we get the intake fully assembled, and then once everything fits right, then we'll go ahead and snug everything down. Next will be the intake pipe as well, the metal section. The longer portion goes towards the turbo. Go ahead and set that in there. And we might have to change the orientation of this until we get it just right. We'll have to play around with it. And before we put on the final intake hose, they want you to take this secondary air, if you have one, if your car comes with it, and rotate it 90 degrees, clockwise, I imagine. So they say to firmly grasp it and turn it 90 degrees. It should be something like that. Okay, now we are ready to install our final piece of intake piping, which will be this 90-degree elbow. We have the hose clamps here and the secondary air adapter if your car comes with it. If not, they provide a block-off plate. And we have a little vacuum elbow here. So before we hook it up to the rest of the piping, we'll have to install the secondary air and the vacuum line from earlier, which we disconnected from the factory air box. So we'll go ahead and do those now. Now we should be able to fit it on. Okay. So we'll go ahead and try and adjust everything. Make sure all the hoses connect up. Make sure everything is secure Now we can go ahead and tighten all of our hose clamps. I have one here, one here, one here, one here, and don't forget the one at the bottom. Just a pro tip, make sure that this vacuum hose does not reach over this coolant line like I almost just did. It can go underneath, and it sits much better like that. And now the final step, which is arguably the best step, is to install the air filter itself. And so this, with the hose clamp also included, will go on right here. And it fits beautifully, as all of Integrated Engineering's products do. And we'll just give this a twist. And the last step is to just go through and double check everything, make sure everything's tight, but not too tight, and make sure you didn't forget anything. Another final step is to include the weather stripping that goes on top of the heat shield. A nice touch included by Integrated Engineering. Now we have a completed install of the Integrated Engineering turbo inlet pipe, which you can't quite see, and their cold air intake. Now the only thing left to do is to see how it sounds.